if you are ready.
Okay, and Susan, after we do the roll call, could you maybe state who's in the room for the record and for people listening?
Yes, sure.
Okay. All right, I'm ready when you guys are.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to be calling the City Council work session to order at 6:02 p.m. Can I get a roll call, please?
Mayor Copeland is absent. Tom Baylor.
Here.
Kathy Sherman.
Here.
Jeff Guard.
Here.
Melina Meyer.
Here.
Ann Schaefer.
Here.
David Allison.
Here.
David Gleason is absent. So City Manager Howarth is here and City Clerk Bourgeois. Harmony is doing the tech. We have Nate Taylor, Acting Police Chief. Zach from the Cordova Times. Tony Chanella, the Harbor Master, and Ken Fay, the Finance Director, and Barb Jewell has walked in, School Board Chair. That's it for now.
Okay, thank you. So this work session topic is on policing in Cordova. There was a community survey and the results are in, so council's going to be discussing that, and I'll turn over it to the city manager to discuss the results and for the presentation.
Thank you. This has been a really interesting process. We engaged Agnew Beck to assist with it because obviously we all have been very occupied with things like COVID. But this topic emerged as a really important one, actually as far back as the budget work sessions last year when I first started as city manager. There were a lot of questions raised by council members as well as public about why do we need, do we need 24/7 coverage? How many police officers do we need? So that kind of planted a seed that maybe we needed more information. And then with the national dialogue that's been happening, it seemed to be a potent time to think about this in a more significant way. So we distributed a survey and Agnew Beck ran it for us. And I'm going to turn this over to Shelley Wade, who is a principal at Agnew Beck, to go over the results, to allow all of you to ask questions as you need for informational purposes. And then both Nate and myself will be able to talk a little bit about some next steps that we're going to employ. And also Nate will discuss some things that are already underway that will remove some of the items that were raised as issues from the table. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Shelley Wade with Agnew Beck. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen, and good evening, council members. Can you guys hear me okay?
Roger.
Yes.
Excellent. That's a great start. So as Helen mentioned, our team was engaged to help with this effort, and as always, it's a total honor and privilege to work with all of you and the community of Cordova. We're excited to be able to continue our connection to the great things that you guys do as a community. And this is clearly a very good example of how you are very proactive in your thinking and really wholeheartedly and thoughtfully engage the community to get input in your actions and to think strategically about how to work together to improve the quality of service that you provide as a city. So I'm excited to share the results. I know Helen is kind of running our PowerPoint presentation for us this evening. And so that first slide that you should see is a little image. It says Cordova Community Policing, and there's an image of something called a word cloud, which was really a combination, a little graphic, and I'm sure you folks have seen something similar to this before, and I think we had similar pieces in the comprehensive plan update. It really is just an indicator of the quality and the frequency of the results and some of the words and phrases that folks used in their open-ended responses. So if you see a word that's bigger, that means it was commented on more frequently. That indicates frequency. So we just thought that was kind of a little spark and a good way to set the stage and take us into this conversation. So as Helen mentioned, and Helen, if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide for us.
Okay.
Just wanted to share, thank you. So wanted to share a little bit about the survey itself and the process. So we did open the survey. We had some great conversations leading up to the survey launch and had the opportunity to talk with Chief Hicks when he was still there before retirement, and then also interim Chief Taylor, and to get their thoughts, and then also, of course, with Helen and others to get their thoughts on a potential process and some potential questions. And once we did a little bit of research, kind of looking across the country at how this type of questionnaire and survey process has been addressed in different communities and communities of Cordova size, we landed on a set of questions and then really launched it on August 7th and kept it open until August 31st. So we did have a translation into Spanish and Tagalog. Unfortunately, we did not receive any responses on those translated versions. And so I think the one thing that Helen may have mentioned in her opening comments, but I know has been mentioned previously, is this is the beginning of a conversation. And so there are a number of other opportunities, and Helen and I think Nate too will speak to this a little bit later, but this is the beginning of a conversation on community policing. And so there is an opportunity to engage non-English speakers and other folks in the community that did not have an opportunity to respond. But we are excited to report we did receive 203 responses, and as you will find in your meeting packet, there in that full report that is the first portion of your meeting packet, the responses were really rich and detailed and very thoughtful. And so exciting to get the number of responses that we did, but also the quality of the responses. I did also want to share just sort of the flavor of the questions, and hopefully each of you had the opportunity to respond. But as you may recall, we asked first about roles. So what are the top 3 most important ways the Cordova Police can meet their mission? Then we asked a question about performance in terms of satisfaction with how the police, Cordova Police are doing in your community. And then we asked about what's the one thing that you'd really like to know about our community police but have never asked? And then we asked a question about priorities. So what is really the best use of Cordova's public safety resources? And then we left a space for folks to provide other comments, questions, or concerns. So that was the structure of the questions, a 5-question survey. I was just looking back at the results a little bit earlier. It took folks anywhere between 5 to 10 minutes to complete the survey. We did do advertising for the survey through all of the means that you see up on the screen there, through Facebook, or if you're looking at your packet, Facebook, and kind of all the usual suspects of things. What's not listed here is we also did, but there's a photo or a little image of a press release. So we did, and through the Cordova Times is also not listed here. So very important tools that we, through our experience and other processes, have learned that those are the best ways to get the word out in Cordova. So that's a little bit about the survey process itself. And now I'm going to transition into the actual results. Starting on that next slide, Helen, if you could move us ahead to the top 3 most important, is at the top of the slide. And what you will see here, I'm going to go through each question and give you a little summary of the results, and then it definitely would point each of you to the fuller responses that include some sample quotes and questions that we selected as examples of the types of open-ended responses we got on the qualitative or open-ended questions. So the first big question that we asked folks was, you know, from your perspective, again, what are the top 3 most important ways you believe the Cordova Police can meet their mission? And then we gave them several options to select from. And so these, again, these options were identified through some research and looking at other community surveys of this flavor. And You can see here that the top 3 most selected responses were those of preventing, detecting, and investigating criminal activities, enforcing the law, and arresting offenders as the top 3 of the multiple options. We did have approximately 10% that said other. We did not have an open-ended question related to the other category. So we don't have a specific direction on that, but the good news is that we had a lot of other open-ended question opportunities where folks could weigh in on either their topmost priority or other comments they have related to this question. So as mentioned in the first slide, we did actually get a total of 203 responses, and on this particular question, those 203 folks also answered this question. So we had full or 100% participation in this question. So moving us ahead, and if okay with everyone, I'm going to go through the slides first, and then I'll be excited to answer any questions and work with Helen and Nate to clarify or add detail where helpful. So Helen, if you could take us to the next slide, which focuses on the responses to question number 2. And that question, again, was about satisfaction with the work that the police are doing in your community. And folks had, and it was a range or a scale of very satisfied to very dissatisfied. And you can see an overall summary over to the right there that shows us that about 50% combined folks said satisfied or very satisfied. And then you had about 21% that were in the dissatisfied or very dissatisfied category. And finally, about 28% that were neutral, were neither satisfied or dissatisfied. And so again, I think some of our open-ended responses can begin to unpack levels of satisfaction and dissatisfaction. And then if you're curious, we had 201 folks that responded to this question, or participants that responded to this question. So for question number 2, we did, and I'm moving now to the next slide, which unpacks that satisfaction piece just a little bit more. And we did provide folks with the opportunity to weigh in with sharing any additional thoughts or examples that they had of interactions with the Cordova police. And so this is, if you're curious and you want to see a little bit more on this, it's actually page 3 of your packet has more detail with illustrative quotes that explain some of these themes. But the themes are the top 5 themes in this case, because as you could see, we only had 80 folks of the 203 that actually decided to add a open-ended comment or respond to this open-ended question. So, but the top themes in descending order of frequency, meaning the enforcement category at the top received the most open-ended responses. And what we've done is sort of generalize that into a theme and kind of the flavor of that theme. And so you can see here that the most popular theme related to examples of interactions with the Cordova police were about enforcement, and then specifically about drug-related enforcement. And I think you will see that that theme related to community concern related to drug-related crime and enforcement is certainly a popular theme. And then you saw interactions. That next bullet gives us another theme about complementary or positive responses regarding police interactions. And then the next bullet I think is important to highlight because that is also repeated in other parts of the survey responses, and that's visibility and engagement. And so is there an opportunity to increase the visibility or the communications and engagement that the police have with the community? Questions about capacity, again, you'll see this is a repeated theme in questions further down, asking the question of, is the force too small or understaffed, or where are we given the priorities and the duties and roles responsibilities of the police? And then following through, you'll see this again later with the question concern about repeat offenders. So some folks wanting to see more engagement with folks that are repeating crimes or at least perceived as doing criminal activity. So again, more detail on that on page 3 of your packet if you're curious to learn a little bit more about those open-ended responses. And Helen, I'm actually going to not totally follow our sequence. I'm going to move us to priorities. So, and I'm going to come back to our understanding our police. So if you could please take us to slide number 7, and it says priorities or the responses to question number 4.
Done.
Okay. So this one I just thought it would be more helpful to hit the priorities before we talk about those big questions, because we've just talked about what do folks really see as the top 3 most important roles of the community police or Cordova police, and then kind of their questions related to satisfaction, and start to pop out some themes. And as I mentioned, when we ask the question about what do you believe are the best uses of Cordova's public safety resources, you see here again some of those same themes. And again, you have descending order of frequency. So the bullet at the top received more responses than the bullet at the very bottom. And about 168 folks responded to this question. And this was an open-ended question, so I will just say, not surprising to me because I know Cordova, but we got a lot of feedback. So some folks really spent some significant time, and you'll see some of those illustrative quotes that are on page 6 of your packet if you want to see more detail. But I'll just hit on some of the highlights, and then, this certainly, and I know that Nate will talk about some of the actions or ideas related to some of these, but some repeating themes, as I mentioned, are drug crimes and youth prevention. So again, with that focus on better understanding what the story is and what the trends are and what police action is being taken to prevent and enforce drug-related crimes. And then again, police presence, that idea of engagement. And so is there an opportunity for increased engagement or communications on behalf of the police, or that presence within the community? Folks really clearly see enforcement as a key piece in enforcing the law, and that directly connects to that top 3 question number 1, which were predominantly about protection and enforcement. And this one I thought was really interesting, and I know that Helen's maybe going to talk a little bit about some other directly related efforts that are happening in the community to really focus the police roles and responsibilities on those things that are tied directly to their work and part of their mandate as community police, and to expand social services and supports so police are not having to act as social workers or go beyond the scope of their work to provide additional supports. And that can be a real struggle and challenge that takes them away from what the community sees as big priorities, including those top 3 that they answered in question number 1 related to enforcement and protection. You'll see also, again, and this relates to some of the other things that we've talked about in terms of there's an opportunity for education outreach, and I think this tool is one really good example of that, along with some other potential activities, where we're really providing education and community outreach, so, and including with youth, to be clear about, what is the role of community police, but also any other questions that folks have about the other things that you see listed there: training, safety and peace, and the size of the force. So these, again, are the top 10 themes. We received, as mentioned, 168 responses to this question, meaning folks took the time to write out detailed responses. And so this, again, is just those themes that were repeated a number of times and really were not just reiterated in the priorities question, but also in the top 3 question. And then now, Helen, we can go back to the understanding our police, because I think, again, you see a lot of the same kinds of themes and questions and opportunity for clear communication and transparent communication from the police department to the community on these topics. So those include, again, things like drug use, some of the things that we talked about in terms of presence with coverage, and resources. Do we have the right size force for what we need to be doing in a community of this size and what our issues are? The question again about repeat offenders, I mean, how is that handled by the police? And folks have questions about why are they not charged or convicted. Again, you can see the detailed responses, if you're looking for those, to question number 3 are actually on page 4 of your packet if you want to see some sample questions. But many of them are shown here as examples. So the other thing I just wanted to mention here too is that I love this one because again, they're in descending order of frequency, but the second one on that list is folks want to know from the police department. So want to know from the perspective of officers, you know, what do you perceive as the needs and priorities for Cordova? So there's, again, just a real opportunity for communication and information exchange with the police department and the community. And then curious things like motivation. Why did Cordova's officers choose to go into law enforcement? What type of training do they receive? What is the policing budget and how it's spent? So we received about 147 responses to this question. So again, a lot of time and thoughtful responses from participants that answered this question. So that takes me to our really last 2 slides. And so Helen, I'm moving to slide number 8 related to question 5. Which was sort of a broader question, and it says other thoughts at the top, and we just thought we wanted to provide the space. If we'd not asked a question that had really resonated with folks or they had some remaining thoughts or concerns, we wanted to provide a space for them to share those ideas or questions. So you can see here some examples that were reiterated, and then there is just a lot more detail in your packet, really starting on page 8 and going all the way through really page 12. So there's just a lot of additional feedback. Most of that additional feedback were comments reiterating or questions reiterating the themes that I've already covered in the other questions. There were some that were outliers, and that's what this slide does share, is some questions including increased communications from the police to the community was one example. We had not covered that exactly in those other questions or results. Not surprising because it's on everybody's mind, COVID-19 response. We got some very specific comments about impounded vehicles, leadership, and really recruiting and focusing experienced leaders. You see some, again, specific ideas about volunteer patrols and neighborhood watch, the opportunity for the police to collaborate with other organizations and partners in the community, and I think there's some really great news on that. And then just conducting additional analysis, so folks seem to be interested in continuing to receive information and better understand what's happening in the police department. And then I'll be almost finished. Just wanted to share that folks were really very thankful for the opportunity and I think really supported this effort. And so there were several, applause for the city taking the initiative and launching the survey and really launching this larger effort, which is, a bigger conversation and dialogue on community policing. And just folks were happy to have the opportunity to participate. And then lastly, on the final slide there, slide number 9, there were some survey topics that definitely had some divergent viewpoints where you had folks that, you almost had sort of equal weight with folks saying oversight. So, independent oversight of the department, so let's get more of that, or that versus trust the department to operate independently. And same in terms of department size and budget and enforcement priorities. And I think some of these, the response and the opportunity is clear communication and consistent communication and transparency on what is happening in education. I would say also on what the role is, what the budget is, and there's a lot of opportunity as we move forward for communicating some of the remaining questions and concerns here. So with that, I will wrap up and happy to answer any questions that you have for me. And I know that Helen and Nate are also available to answer any other specific questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. Both Nate and I are here to entertain any questions that you might have, but I also wanted to give Nate the opportunity to discuss a little bit some immediate thoughts around the survey and things that the department already has in play that I think is important. And then I also want to talk a little bit about some developments that have been going on as a result of this survey. So I will let Nate start.
Thank you, Helen.
Is it on? Sorry.
Yep, it's on. So as far as the survey goes, I was as interested to see the results of the survey, I think, as anybody else. I'm excited about the results of the survey. The top 3 responses in general were that folks in town want us to enforce the law and arrest offenders, and I was glad to see that because that's our job. That's what we're supposed to be doing. So everybody wants us to do our job. I'm glad that everybody, kind of is along that lines. Some of the other topics that were brought up, specifically leaning towards like the vehicles. That is already a project that's in work to get us a secure impound location. Mark Wagner with the Public Works Department actually approached me a while back and said he was already in the process of locating a bid to kind of see what the cost would be to get us a secure location for those cars so that we won't have cars stored where they currently are stored, but we'll have a location that's secure so that the cars will be secure for their owners or whoever ends up claiming them later on. That was one of that. And then along the lines of collaboration, I think part of that might just be along the educational part of this with the community and everybody else is that the police department has over the years collaborated with other services in town, and we're expanding that collaboration going forward. We've always had a close working relationship with, for instance, the Cordova Family Resource Center. They take a lot of burden off of the department in that they can provide family services to families, and that we can direct families to them to help solve some of their family services needs that we don't have to spend our time on that aren't necessarily criminal in nature, but they just need family support. So the Family Resource Center has always been a good asset to us, and we've always collaborated with them, and they actually recently asked me to join their board. So I was happy to help join their board and replace Mike Hicks, who, since he retired, is not on there. But we are expanding our relationship with some of the other service entities in town, specifically with Sound Alternatives, who we have worked with in the past, but we're getting a more close working relationship with them to try and, again, assist some of the folks that we come in contact with who may need more mental health help along those lines rather than actual law enforcement help. But we may engage them because we get called on for them. Perhaps we are developing a better relationship with the Sound Alternative Center as a whole, so that we can direct people into there, or they can, because both those organizations operate a lot on grant monies, which are specifically targeted towards that type of work. And so since they have those monies already available, it's cost effective, and it's effective for everybody in the community to utilize them if we can. So if there's any other questions, I'll be happy to answer if Helen has anything else she wants to talk about.
I want to briefly talk about a new effort. Barb Jewell is here, but Sound Alternatives, Family Resource Center, Native Village VIAC, and others are part of a coalition of providers in Cordova that deal with substance abuse, mental health issues. And they are engaging in this survey results, and Nate, myself, as well as that group, are working as a new team, if you will, to try to establish better working relationships and also provide better service to the community as appropriate, have every entity do their best work rather than having the police department try to do it all. So already there's a collaborative effort in place, and we'll be certainly reporting back on that as we progress. We've had one meeting so far. I think one of the really critical things that this survey brought to light was the need for communication. And as you all know, we have established a new position, transitioned from one position to another, but we have recently hired a new communications director. It's in my manager report, which will be at the regular meeting, but that individual will be able to intersect with all the departments in city and provide better communication to the public about the services we provide, how we provide them, and be a conduit, if you will, for the kinds of information that the community seems to be hungry for. So Nate and I have chatted a lot about that, and one of the next steps for us is going to be having a series of community meetings online on YouTube, working with the radio station and also with the newspaper to answer some of those topics, hot button questions, if you will, that the community has, and make sure that folks understand what the department does, what their budget is, you know, what do we do when people get arrested. And I think, Nate, you had mentioned earlier that one of the things that was brought up is we all know when someone gets arrested, but we never know what happens to them after they get arrested. And I don't know if you wanted to mention something
Yeah,
about
well, I
that.
noticed that as one of the responses, like you said, and several of the areas in the survey brought out the need, like Helen said, for us to probably just communicate better. Not that things aren't happening there, or maybe it's perceived they're not happening. Maybe we don't communicate that well enough what is happening. And yeah, the thing along the lines of somebody gets arrested, we publish the arrests in the paper. We don't publish the results of some criminal cases, or of any criminal cases at this point, but there's no reason we couldn't publish results when a criminal case finishes as to what the result was. You know, and I see that in other communities, in their paper or in their media somewhere, they'll publish, you know, an article about, hey, remember this big case from 2 years ago? It's finally done, and here's what the results was. Here's what the sentences that were handed out. We've never done that, but I mean, it's not something we certainly something we can look into doing so that folks understand, you know, where the case went and how it resulted and what the end result was. And just the fact that how the system works, that it oftentimes these results occur years down the road.
And I think, again, back to our new focus, our ability now to focus on communications. We aren't going to be burdening the police department with those communications, but we will have a person on staff that will be able to help with those communications. So I think that's a good, easy, low-hanging fruit win for city and for the department. So at this point, where we are is we're going to get ready to go into a public communications phase where we identify the issues and provide the answers in a very public way. And Nate and other members of the department will be involved in those conversations. I think it might be fun. I know one of the questions was, why did you join the police? What kind of training did you get? And we do have someone who's a new officer just going through the academy, and I think that might be a really interesting thing for the community to hear. What is it that you just went through, and how are you trained? And so we'll have an opportunity to make sure that the community hears from our officers, from Nate, and make sure those questions get answered. So with that, I'll turn it back to questions from council, if anyone has anything they want to know from Nate or myself or Shelley.
Helen, I was wondering if I could just add maybe a couple of things to what you just shared.
Sure, that's Shelley. Yep.
Yeah, sorry. It's Shelley. Two things related to sharing the information with the community. We've developed sort of a one-pager version of the results that could easily be shared and digested and maybe uploaded to the city website. But one of the other things that I think exciting is there's an opportunity to also refresh the police department's webpage and maybe do like an FAQ or frequently asked questions that just has some of this information that's there for folks to reference. But I think, like Helen said, it's going to be the fun part of it is that opportunity to hear directly from Nate and his officers on their experiences. And I was just looking at, related to your comment, Nate, about publishing the results of cases, just looking at a correspondence from, the chief of police here in Anchorage that showed trends going down with some crimes, and then talked about, Chief Al talked about, what specific projects they're doing to keep the community safer. So yeah, a lot of different opportunities, but I just wanted to add those two because those are also ones that I think that Helen and Nate and others have been brainstorming on that are really valuable opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you. So council questions, Councilman Ellison.
Yeah, first of all, Chief, thanks for your service and to your department. I have a question. I'm not quite sure how to word it, so if you want to plead no contest, feel free. But working with the district attorney, I've talked to, I've been on council for, number of years over the course of several different chiefs and many different officers. And I know one of the frustrations that I've heard from them in the past, and if the DA is listening, not from any of the current officers here, but their frustration is, a lot of the trends we see in these slides is that, well, we know who the drug dealers are and we know who's selling, and nothing ever happens to them. We arrest this guy 15 times for ripping stuff off of people's garages and stuff, and he just seems to get let go all the time. And I guess I think a lot of that has to do with the district attorney making some of those decisions that is beyond your control. And so I guess the question would be, how much influence does the district attorney have over some of these situations? And secondly, is there anything that we can do to support that? Certainly give them a copy of this survey, those kind of things. Anyway, my general question is, how do you work with the DA?
Sure, and a good question, kind of a tough question. It does vary, obviously, by our district attorney that's assigned to us. So they do come and go, they change. Currently, our district attorney that we have now, our assistant district attorney there, titled, who works under the district attorney out of the Palmer office there. We have a new one that came in a few months back here, and she's very responsive at this point to our cases that we give her. She seems to be, staying on top of them, and that does, it does vary by the district attorney themselves, just in their how they work their cases and in their workload that they're getting, because obviously they represent us and numerous other communities, in addition to having a workload out of the Palmer office for the city and the Matsu Valley area, because there's obviously a lot of cases they handle up there. But yes, the district attorney does come into play at times, depending case specifically, of course, but at times in cases, the district attorney's decision whether or not to move forward or what to offer in the results of prosecution or deals on conviction, they make those calls. So if somebody, gets charged with a numerous amount of crimes, but that gets pled down to lesser charges, that is the call of the district attorney. They do make those calls.
Yeah, I can imagine that'd be frustrating sometimes. So would it help to provide them a copy of our survey results, or would they even read it, or would it just be?
It would definitely, I think it would definitely not be, it wouldn't be a bad thing to do, just to provide them, just to let them know, hey, our community had a survey and here's what our community members see, just so they are aware of what our community feels is a priority here.
Okay, thank you. One other question regarding the your current budget and current staffing. Are you staffed to budget, or are you shorthanded right now? I'm not saying the budget's right or wrong. I'm just saying, you know, are we budgeted for 4 officers and the chief, or
We're
3 officers?
budgeted for 5 positions, so 4 officers and a chief currently. And currently we have 2 officers and a chief, and I have 2 potential hires in the works going through that process of potentially hiring 2, which would fill all the positions we currently have budgeted.
And we're short mostly because, I mean, I think we've been advertising for.
We have been advertising for quite a while, and actually it was recently, within the last 2 months, that our administrative assistant down there, June James, came up with a plan of attack in advertising in other websites that we hadn't utilized in the past, and they were very effective. So we got quite a few more applicants that way than we had been through the other means. She identified several areas. One of those is actually Alaska Municipal League, which we're a member of the Municipal League, and we get advertised for free on their website, and we had never utilized that. So that was one of the things we utilized, along with a couple of commercial job seeking type sites that don't cost us that much money, and they did result in a lot of applications getting turned in. So yeah, I'm hopeful that in the future, as we have openings come and go, we should be able to fill those a little bit more quickly than we've been able to in the past.
Okay, good, thank you.
Other questions, council?
Yeah, this is Melina.
Vice Mayor Meyer.
Yeah, I thank you for doing this survey. I think it really helps us as council and allows the community to really give thoughtful input on a public department that we have. I like a lot of the ideas that were talked about, and Shelley, thank you so much for doing this, and the presentation is really nice, and there's a lot to digest going through all the results and the comments and conflicting comments, what the community thinks that the police could and can't do, so I could see how that's really frustrating for any department to figure out what to do. I did like one of the comments there that I was reading when I was reading through it about data, and I was kind of curious of what kind of data do we collect? You know, because I don't really know what kind of calls come in or what areas our police is really most needed for. So I think having a website of saying, you know, a lot of phones are checked, or dog calls, or time being taken up for looking into drug investigations. What kind of data are we currently collecting, and would that be a huge undertaking?
I'm not sure if it would be a huge undertaking. I mean, we currently log all of our calls that come in that result in us doing something, aside from, you know, just a comment call. But any call that comes in that we do something, we have to go out, or even if we have to call somebody, gets logged as a call. So those are all categorized. So we would have that raw categorization data. I'm not sure how much of an undertaking it would be to collect it and put it out in a format that would be sort of sanitized, so you could just see the raw data on calls and not necessarily, you know, who or what, or, you know, that kind of thing. There's some confidentiality, but I think it would probably be possible. We recently have transitioned, we're going in the process of transitioning over to a new record management system from ours, which became outdated and not supported. So once we move to that, which is a state system that many other agencies in the state are actually on, they would probably have the ability through their IT to help us with that, because they manage that system, and they do reporting federally for what's called NIBRS reporting, which is federal crime statistics. So they pull that data. That system's designed to pull that federal crime statistic reporting data out. So we would definitely be able to get that for sure.
This is Helen. I just want to say that might be a topic for a future radio or other communication, because I know there was some questions that were raised about, you know, how many drug calls do we get? How many violent crimes do we have? How many domestic violence calls do you get? How many DUIs? How many this? Where are the major areas that the police department finds itself putting most of its energies? And we can certainly, I think Nate is able to respond to that at a later meeting.
Okay, great. Yeah, I thought that was interesting, and it kind of put things in a perspective of me of the community wanting more communication and alternatives, and I think having that data can help, you know, kind of have even the whole community think a little bit about how maybe we can find some alternative resources, because seems like to me that when other areas in the community are failing, it falls under the police force. So I'm really happy to hear the collaboration and the partnerships working, because there's some things that once they fall into the police, then they, you know, like Allison was talking about, the DA has a lot of control over some of these cases. So maybe if we can find alternatives, if charging people isn't always the most effective avenue to go about, maybe we can find some alternatives and partnerships to be combating these issues from all fronts, law enforcement and alternatives. So, really happy to hear this, see this survey out. I think it's long overdue, and I think that we should do it more often and with our other departments too. I think it's a good opportunity for the community to give thoughtful, good input, and for council departments, everybody to kind of be working off a good document that's community oriented. So thank you.
Councilman Guard?
Yeah, the data thing was one thing that's interested me. I've had questions for quite a while, and I don't know that I fall on either side of the question, but I've been interested in what our workload for the force was. So if we could use this data that our new system is going to put out to see what we have going on for workload, as far as, you know, how many call-ins we get, or what are they, and get an idea what kind of time frame it takes for an officer or staff to deal with a call like this, what time on the clock they land, if most of our calls are at 8 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon, or at 2 at night to 6 in the morning, or, you know, to just make our job easier to sit down and figure out budget-wise what we need to be doing to make sure we have the resources available for our officers and department that we need. I'd be real interested in seeing some of that data.
Yeah, and we'll work with them. Like I said, we just got trained on that new system, and so we're going to migrate over to it, and we'll start using it. So with our other system that we have currently using, we may be able to get some of that. I'm not sure how much. You know, that system also, we have to do the same crime reports to the federal government, but a lot of times with that system, we have to extrapolate that, man. We have to go in there and just count things, because it doesn't count all the data points that we report. So, but the newer system should do most of that, and yeah, it'll probably take a little while for us to input enough data into it, because of course, put data in, get data out. But yeah, we should, going forward in the future, we definitely should be able to create reports of that nature, I would.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilman Baylor?
Yeah, that's where I was going to go with the data too. I think that's the part that's flawed with this survey. I mean, how can you sit here and say we need policing 24/7, or we need it 12/7? What do we need without that data to understand what our crime rate is? I've been fortunate enough to be here for over 30 years, and it's like Mayberry. I shouldn't say this, but I've never had anything stolen. But other people that have crimes against them, I mean, it's a major deal and totally upsetting. And why aren't the police here? You know, so there's different views to this. And if you don't have the data to understand what's going on, I don't know how you can make any decisions as far as policing. I think Cordova has been way ahead of the curve. And as we talk about all this social service stuff, and I think it was, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, Patty Clander had a lot to do with it. I don't know if it was Cordova Family Resources or Small Alternatives, but years ago, they saw the need for some help for people besides the police department. They got this thing going, and they've continued to keep it going. And I think they've done a great job. And as you heard the police chief say, they're working with them. So my hat's off to all of those people. Those aren't easy jobs to fill, and some of it's volunteers. So we've been kind of ahead of that curve. And I guess for the council is to support them getting their funding and help out what we can, and that's how we'd help out. How can the community help with crime? Well, it was a couple years ago. We had a
a drug dog here, and the school superintendent at the time and the police chief took the initiative to walk the dog through the school, through the lockers, when the kids were not there, just through the, and oh my goodness, you know, you can't do that. I mean, the poor little darlings, their brains are only half developed, that's what they tell us. But if the kids are getting drugs, they're usually not importing them, so they're having to buy them from somebody. So that's how you start working these things. Where'd you get the drugs? Well, I got them from Johnny C. over here. Well, then you start going from that. But, you know, you've got to support your police. If they want to look for these things, you've got to support that. And of course, sometimes our local juries tend to let people off too. So all of those things, I think the data is the most important for me. I go through this, I don't really see any new issues of same things we've been dealing with the last 30 years, same questions. I think to get the answers, we need to know what the crime rate is. Recently, I was on my job site and I witnessed an accident. A guy swung into the other lane, hit another vehicle. That was at lunchtime. Had some words with the guy and left. Well, called the police. They happened to be out at the airport, so there's nobody local. So this guy left. Fortunately, he wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed and kept driving, and he eventually got apprehended. But it took a long time. But you think about that, it's noon, and you've got a person driving around at high rate of speed under the influence. You know, and we've got kids on White Shed Road, and we've got other people. So that's the other part of, do we need policing 24/7? We want the police to get people like that off the road. They did respond when they could, but again, they were out at the airport. There was nobody else in town, so that person could very well have gotten away easily or gone down and hit somebody else. So it's a tough call how much policing we need, but I think getting the data will help us make that decision.
Other questions online, Council?
This is Ann.
Councilman Schaefer.
I thought this survey was really interesting, and the data component especially is really interesting, as well as the public education and outreach component as well. So I was glad there was a plan kind of to do more education, more public engagement with the new staff position coming on. And so kind of what I'm wondering is, what are the next steps, really? Like, how do we use this survey to move on? It sounds like if we can look at that data, or get a handle on that data, we can see when we need policing and what level of policing we maybe need in our community. I think it'd also be interesting to have a better understanding of how the different partnerships with the other enforcement bodies in town, like how does municipal police partner or collaborate with Coast Guard and Service and state troopers, and see if there are ways to collaborate to help each other out. So yeah, I guess my question is those kind of partnerships, and then what are the next steps, kind of?
So next steps, I think where we are is communication. It's all about communication. The public has raised some questions, that some of which we can easily answer, some of which we need more information for, and obviously council falls into that same category. It's, you know, what you just talked about data. What are our calls? What are our needs? And that's something that Nate and I will be working on and making sure that information gets back to everyone. In terms of partnerships with other law enforcement agencies, I'm going to turn that over, because we do have Forest Service, brown shirts, we've got Coast Guard, we've got state troopers, and I don't know how they work together, which is another good question to put out there as one of those topics that we want to address and make sure a community understands.
Sure, and I'm sure we can delve into it.
I was saying, from my perspective, for such a small town, in theory, it seems like we do have a lot of enforcement personnel in town, but I do understand you all have different missions and different areas where you work and operate, so.
Correct. And yes, so we do have a really good working relationship with our department, with the Forest Service officer who's here, and with the currently two law Alaska wildlife troopers that are stationed here. And obviously, when all of us are working, yeah, we have quite a large spread. Obviously, they work primarily, out the road on the forest lands. They both have boats and do boat patrol. The wildlife troopers, of course, do a considerable amount of enforcement of the fisheries here. So, there's that. We're the only ones who work 24 hours a day. So they work regular hour kind of shifts, and then they go home. And so our department's the one who answers the 911 calls 24 hours a day.
Other questions online, Council?
This is Councilman Sherman.
Councilman Sherman.
Yeah, most of my questions were answered, and I'm just really thrilled with the results and how many people responded and put time and energy into the survey. I understand the next step. I'm anxious about the new PIO, of course. If we have a one-pager that Amy Beck has already completed, all those places we talked about are great for posting it. I was going to suggest maybe a physical, not that I'm into printing paper, but physical handouts that we could get out immediately before this new PIO officer comes on board, so that the community can kind of see some instantaneous results of the survey rather than waiting till October. I think that would be really handy, maybe even, just handouts at the local businesses or a box cutter mailing, whatever. I think we can do that now and not wait. And I just wanted to, the data is going to be really good, and it was exciting to hear Taylor say that he's got some warm bodies on the line, because that has been going on for a long time, so that's exciting. Thanks.
Okay, Council, we have about 4 minutes left for the scheduled public hearing. Any other questions?
This is Melina.
Councilman Meyer.
Just maybe a thought or a request on the next step kind of portion. As far as the community discussions, kind of like a town hall, it would be nice if we could do that perhaps on Zoom, maybe Zoom and tied into YouTube, so people can log on and be part of the conversation a little bit more rather than seeing it from one-sided or having to call in a call-in number. I think an online video chat that people could sign up for to call, and then if people wanted to just watch it just on the YouTube, I think that would be helpful. And then my other note for the next step was kind of plan on, I would like us to have a survey or a police kind of survey assessment, perhaps like on a schedule, maybe every 3 years, or I'm not sure what the hospital does, but I know they do a health assessment. I think that we should do a public safety assessment that we do perhaps every 3 years, every year and a half, every 2 years. I don't know what kind of schedule it should be on, but I think we should mark that on our calendars so we don't forget it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councilman Meyer. Any other comments, questions, Council?
This is Ann.
Councilman Schaefer.
Just a note, like if that one pager that Agnew Beck already has ready to go could be translated to Spanish and Tagalog, I think that would be good too, to get out there.
Okay. Other suggestions, Council? Okay, hearing none, entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn. Second.
Motion, Guard, second, Allison. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the public hearing's adjourned, or work session.